and his research interests include causal inference and clinical trial design and analysis. He has published over 100 research articles, mostly in statistical journals. He's a elected fellow of ASA and also International Statistical Institute. So without further ado, I will hand over to Zhiwei. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Don, for the introduction and for organizing the session. Yeah, so it's a great pleasure for me to be here today and talk about a covariate adjustment for survival endpoints. This is joint work with my colleagues at Gilead, Ya Wang and Dong Xi. So here is the outline of my talk. Following a brief introduction, I'll spend some time describing the methodology. Then I'll show you a simulation study followed by an illustrative example. Then I'll finish the talk with some concluding remarks. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to stop me and let me clarify. So it is well recognized by now that the statistical efficiency of randomized trials can be improved by incorporating information from baseline covariates. This usage of covariate data is commonly known as covariate adjustment, and it's drawing a lot of attention these days from regulators, practitioners, and researchers. As a result, we're seeing a steady increase in the use of covariate adjustment methods in actual trials. Popular methods for covariate adjustment include ANCOVA for continuous endpoints and standardized logistic regression for binary endpoints. For survival endpoints, there seems to be no clear consensus on what is the preferred method for covariate adjustment. It may be tempting to incorporate covariates through a proportional hazards model. However, this practice changes the estimate from a marginal hazard ratio into a conditional hazard ratio, which is generally different due to non-collapsibility. The possibility of model misspecification makes it even more challenging to interpret and relate the marginal and conditional hazard ratios. More rigorous methods that aim to improve efficiency without changing the estimate have been developed for several different effect measures. And here are some examples. It seems to me these methods have not been used much in practice, if they have been used at all. Possible reasons for their limited use include high demands for methodological sophistication and computational skills. Here we provide a simple and unified approach that's relatively easy to understand and widely applicable to different effect measures, together with an R package that's flexible and easy to use. Our approach is a general-purpose augmentation approach, in which an initial treatment effect estimator is augmented with a term involving treatment assignment and an arbitrary function of covariates, which is known as the augmentation function. If the initial estimator is consistent and asymptotically linear, it's easy to see that the augmented estimator is also consistent and asymptotically linear, and therefore asymptotically normal. The asymptotic variance of an augmented estimator will depend on the augmentation function, which can be optimized using trial data. This approach is implemented in an R package named SLEET, which stands for Superlearner for Efficient Estimation of Treatment Effects. The work I'm presenting today was recently published online in the journal Pharmaceutical Statistics. The paper provides much more information that I can share in this talk. So I would encourage you to check out the paper if you're interested in the details. Let me start by introducing some basic notations. So W is a vector of baseline covariates, and A is a treatment indicator. Randomization implies that A is independent of W. T is a failure time of interest, and C is censoring time. X is the actual observed time, which is the minimum of T and C. And delta is the usual indicator for the failure event. The observed data from an individual patient consists of W, A, X, and delta. These are collectively denoted by O. The observed trial data consists of independent copies of O. So just some standard notations. Our estimate theta can be almost any effect measure, such as the log hazard ratio, the survival difference, or the RMST difference. These are just some examples. The log hazard ratio is usually defined under a specified proportional hazards model, right? But the model is most likely misspecified because all models are wrong. But don't get me wrong, I understand that a misspecified model can still be useful. That's why we use them all the time. But we need to be clear about what it is we are estimating. That's why we define the log hazard ratio as the limit of the maximum partial likelihood estimator. If the model happens to be correct, then this is just the usual log hazard ratio. If the model is misspecified, then our estimate is still well defined. So this definition allows us to focus on covariate adjustment without worrying about non-proportional hazards. In general, theta can be defined implicitly as the limit of a given initial estimator. The initial estimator, which we call theta bar, is almost arbitrary. It's typically unadjusted for covariates, but may involve some adjustment for other reasons than efficiency improvement. For example, theta bar may be a log hazard ratio from estimator from a stratified proportional hazards model, if such a model is preferred over an unstratified one for whatever reasons. The only assumption we make about the initial estimator is that theta bar must be consistent for theta and asymptotically linear in the sense that it behaves like a sample average asymptotically. The function psi here is known as the influence function of theta bar. This assumption is satisfied by virtually all estimators we would consider using in practice. So it's not a big assumption. It implies that theta bar is asymptotically normal, and its asymptotic variance is just the variance of its influence function. Our objective here is to improve efficiency over theta bar by incorporating information from W. And our approach is a general purpose augmentation approach rooted in semi-parametric theory. You don't need to know semi-parametric theory in order to understand this approach. Here, an augmented estimator of theta may be obtained by subtracting from the initial estimator an augmentation term involving an arbitrary function b of the covariates W. The only requirement here is that b of W must have a finite second moment. Otherwise, the function b is arbitrary. For any such function b, you can see that this augmentation term is really a sample average, which converges to 0. Therefore, the augmented estimator converges to the same limit as the initial estimator, and therefore is consistent for theta, right? Now, if we plug in the asymptotically linear representation of theta bar, we'll see immediately that the augmented estimator is also asymptotically linear with this influence function, right? The initial influence function minus this extra term. And therefore, it's asymptotically normal with this asymptotic variance. Now we have a class of augmented estimators. Within this class, it makes sense to look for the most efficient one with the smallest asymptotic variance, right? This optimization problem is relatively easy to solve, and here is the solution: the optimal augmentation function, which minimizes this asymptotic variance. What that means is that an augmented estimator based on this augmentation function would attain the minimum asymptotic variance among all augmented estimators. So to take advantage of this optimality result, we can try to estimate the optimal augmentation function from trial data, and then use the estimated augmentation function to construct an augmented estimator. There are two ways to estimate the optimal augmentation function. One is an indirect plug-in method, and the other one is a direct learning method. In the indirect method, basically, we first estimate this conditional expectation and then plug it back into this expression here for the optimal augmentation function, right? That's why it's called a plug-in method. The direct learning method is based on this expression here, which is minimized by the optimal augmentation function. So we can think of this expectation as a risk function to minimize, and choose B to minimize an empirical version of this quantity. For example, this sample average could be used as our objective function. It turns out this expression can be rewritten as a weighted sum of squares, where we think of this term as a weight and this term here as a response variable. The point is that this formulation allows us to apply any learning algorithm that can minimize a weighted sum of squares. So that gives us a lot of opportunities to, in terms of how to optimize the augmentation function. Here, theta hat is an estimate of the initial influence function obtained by replacing unknown quantities with empirical estimates. In my numerical experience, the direct learning method seems to perform better, at least in some situations. Therefore, the SLEED package implements the direct learning method. But in principle, you could use any method to estimate the optimal augmentation function. Now, to illustrate this approach, let's consider linear regression as a simple example. Suppose B is parameterized as a linear function with a parameter beta. If we plug this into the objective function, the minimization problem can be solved easily using a standard linear regression routine and to produce a beta hat and B hat. And it's easy to see that beta hat converges to some beta star and B hat to a limit function B star, which minimizes this variance function among all linear functions of the specified form. So when we do linear regression, we're not really assuming the optimal augmentation function is linear. Rather, we are looking for the best linear approximation to the optimal augmentation function. It turns out the augmented estimator of theta based on B hat is asymptotically equivalent to the one based on the limit function B star, in the sense of having the same influence function and therefore the same asymptotic variance. So it turns out the estimation error in B hat doesn't really matter as far as asymptotic variance is concerned. The only thing that matters is the limit B star. For this linearly augmented estimator, variance estimation is also straightforward. Here is a simple plug-in variance estimator. So basically, this is the sample variance of an estimated influence function, right? Without these hats, what we have here is exactly the influence function of the augmented estimator. But here, we need to estimate that influence function, and then we take the sample variance. Yeah, a standard plug-in variance estimator. Okay, so that's linear regression. Now let's consider the use of machine learning methods to minimize that objective function. This is quite feasible. In fact, any prediction algorithm that can minimize a weighted sum of squares can be used to minimize that objective function. There are many such algorithms available. For example, regression tree, random forest, support vector machine, or neural network. Yeah, So, we have a lot of choices, and some algorithms may perform better than others for a given application. So it might seem difficult to choose upfront which algorithm we are going to use. Fortunately, we don't have to do that because we can combine multiple candidate algorithms in a data-driven manner using the superlearning principle. This gives us a superlearner, which is a weighted average of the candidate algorithms with weights optimized through cross-validation. The SLEEK package relies on the superlearner package for superlearning. And there are a lot of algorithms available in the superlearner package, and the user is free to choose their candidate algorithms from that collection. Right? Sounds very good. But I must acknowledge that the use of machine learning methods does raise some issues. First, it threatens to violate a Dansker condition that's commonly assumed in this kind of asymptotic theory. Basically, the Dansker condition says that the the machine learning algorithm cannot be too complicated, meaning that the class of functions we're dealing with cannot be too large. This condition is trivially satisfied by parametric models and relatively simple machine learning algorithms such as regression tree. But for more complicated algorithms like random forest or neural network, it might be a problem. And if this condition is violated, and without doing anything to fix it, we may not have asymptotic normality. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the plug-in variance estimator, which works fine for linear regression, may have a downward resubstitution bias when we use machine learning methods. And as a result, we might have variance underestimation and anti-conservative inference. So that's another thing. Fortunately, again, both issues can be addressed using a simple sample splitting technique, which makes the Dansker condition unnecessary and also produces a cross-validated variance estimator that's free of resubstitution bias. I'm not going to give the details here, but if you're interested, you can find out the details in the paper. All right, so that's the approach, and this diagram here helps to explain the augmentation approach. Here is how it works. The user needs to provide covariate data and also specify an initial estimator that is asymptotically linear. The limit of the initial estimator is taken to be the estimate. The initial estimator comes with an inference function because of its asymptotic linearity. And the inference function will be estimated using trial data, either analytically or numerically. Analytical estimates are available for standard analysis. For a user-defined initial estimator, the user has the option to also provide an analytical estimate of the influence function. This is an option, not a requirement, because we can always use the empirical influence function, which is computation intensive but readily available. Anyway, once computed, the empirical influence function will join force with the covariate data to estimate the optimal augmentation function using a specified learning method, which may be a superlearner with sample splitting or another method of our choosing. This gives us an estimated augmentation function, which leads to an augmented estimator of data. The augmented estimator is expected to be more efficient than the initial estimator, and that's the whole point of this exercise. This approach is supported by asymptotic theory as well as simulation results. Here is a simulation study to verify the theoretical results. In this study, we simulate 10,000 trials with 250 patients in each trial. There are 3 covariates that independently follow the standard normal distribution. Treatment allocation is 1-to-1 and independent of covariates. Conditional on treatment and covariates, the failure time, t, follows a Weibull distribution, where the shift parameter is fixed at 3, and the scale parameter depends on A and W. Here we consider 3 scenarios for that dependence. In each scenario, we consider two values of gamma defining a null case and a non-null case. The censoring time C is independent of T, A, and W, and uniformly distributed between 1 and 4, mimicking administrative censoring in a clinical trial with 3 years of patient accrual followed by another year of follow-up. Our estimate data is the log hazard ratio in a proportional hazards model for T, with A as the only covariate. In the null case, this proportional hazards model is correctly specified, and the true value of data is 0 in all scenarios. In the non-null case, this model is misspecified, and the true value of data is defined as the limit of the maximum partial likelihood estimator, and approximated by analyzing large amounts of simulated data with n equal to 1 million. We compare several estimators, including an unadjusted estimator and some adjusted ones. The unadjusted estimator is just the standard maximum partial likelihood estimator. LT08 is an estimator developed by Liu and Cialis in 2008 and implemented in the SPEP2 trial package. YSY24 is an estimator developed by Ye et al. In 2024 and implemented in the Rabin-Carr package. The comparison also includes two augmented estimators implemented in the SLEET package. They both use the unadjusted estimator as the initial estimator, with different choices of b-hat. One is based on linear regression, the other based on a superlearner that combines linear regression, additive regression, regression tree, and random forest. These estimators are compared in terms of empirical bias, standard deviation, relative efficiency, and coverage probability of 95% confidence intervals. The relative efficiency is a variance ratio with the unadjusted estimator as the reference. Specifically, the variance of the unadjusted estimator divided by the variance of the estimator in question. For example, if an estimator has a relative efficiency of 2, it allows the sample size to be reduced by half while maintaining the same level of precision attained by the unadjusted estimator. So for the relative efficiency, it's the higher the better. This table shows the simulation results for the null case. As expected, all estimators are virtually unbiased, but they differ substantially in efficiency. In each scenario, the unadjusted estimator is less efficient than the other estimators. Some of the adjusted estimators, namely LT08, YSY24, and the augmented estimator based on linear regression, tend to perform similarly in efficiency. This is not the case for the augmented estimator based on a superlearner, which outperforms the other estimators in scenarios B and C, but not in scenario A. A probable reason is that the optimal augmentation function may be approximately linear in scenario A, but not in the other scenarios. Anyway, but these results clearly demonstrate the efficiency advantage of nonparametric augmentation using a superlearner as opposed to linear regression. For both augmented estimators, coverage probability is close to the nominal level in all scenarios. This table shows the simulation results for the non-null case. Here, bias is slightly larger in this case, but still negligible for most estimators, with one possible exception, which is LT08. This estimator relies heavily on the proportional hazards assumption, which might be the reason for the observed bias under a misspecified model. The other estimators don't have this problem. The efficiency and coverage results here follow the same pattern as in the null case. For example, the augmented estimator based on linear regression performs similarly to LT08 and YSY to 4. And the augmented estimator based on a superlearner is more efficient than the other estimators in scenarios B and C. And both augmented estimators have correct coverage. So what I have shown you here is a small but representative subset of our simulation results. The complete set is much bigger and covers additional scenarios, estimates, and estimators. The additional results are consistent with our general conclusions here and provide new insights into specific issues. All results are reported in the paper. Okay, now let me show you an illustrative example, which is a randomized trial of adjuvant therapy regimens for preventing cancer cancer recurrence and death after resection of stage 3 colon cancer. This trial enrolled 929 patients with curative intent resections performed in the past 1 to 5 weeks and randomized them to observation only, levamisole alone, or levamisole plus fluorouracil or L plus F with equal allocation among the 3 groups. The observation-only group serves as the control group, and our interest is in comparing the L plus F regimen with control with respect to overall survival. With a median follow-up of 6.5 years, death was observed for 121 patients in the L plus F group and for 168 patients in the control group. The trial data is publicly available from the survival package, and the available baseline covariates include sex, age, and some disease characteristics. This slide shows the Kaplan-Meier curves for the 2 treatment groups, together with 95% pointwise confidence intervals. The Kaplan-Meier curves suggest that L plus F has a delayed and long-lasting effect on overall survival. Based on this observation, one might question whether the commonly used proportional hazards model is appropriate for this comparison and whether the hazard ratio is a useful summary of the treatment effect. I think those are important questions to consider in practice. However, for our illustrative purposes, we're not going to worry about those issues. So here we go. We start by loading the survival package, which contains the colon cancer data. The data we need is a subset of the colon cancer data, which has duplicate entries for each subject to accommodate 2 event types, cancer recurrence and death. Now, to study overall survival, we have to take a subset based on the variable E type. And we also need to exclude the levamisole-only treatment group defined by the variable Rx. So this line of code gives us the subset we need. Next, we define a numerical treatment variable and the probability pi of receiving the experimental treatment. And then we can just call the SLEET function to request an augmented analysis using a superlearner. The syntax is very straightforward. There are only a few arguments. The first one specifies the data frame. The second one is the observed time, follow-up time. The third one is the usual event indicator delta. And the fourth one is the treatment indicator. The baseline covariates are entered in 2 groups, continuous and categorical. The continuous covariates don't have to be truly continuous, but they will be treated as numerical variables. The categorical covariates will be represented using dummy variables. The most important argument is the last one, which specifies the estimand and the initial estimator. Here, by specifying method equals log hazard ratio, we are defining the maximum partial likelihood estimator as the initial estimator and its limit as the estimate. In the output, we see point estimates and standard errors from several different methods, including the unadjusted estimator and the individual learners in the superlearner library. By default, the library consists of linear regression, additive regression, regression tree, and random forest. The superlearner is a weighted average of the individual learners. In this case, the superlearner estimates happen to be quite similar to the linear regression and additive regression estimates, suggesting that those two probably receive larger weights than regression tree and random forest in this particular analysis. Now let's consider estimating the survival difference and RMST difference at 5 years. So we define tau as the number of days in 5 years and feed it to the sleep function. Then we just need to specify the method according to the desired estimate and initial estimator. For both survival difference and RMST difference, the initial estimator is the Kaplan-Meier estimator. So those are the only two changes in the sleep function. The other arguments remain the same. Here again, the superlearner estimates are quite similar to the linear regression and additive regression estimates. And the covariate adjusted standard errors are generally smaller than the unadjusted ones. So finally, some concluding remarks here. I hope I have described the augmentation approach reasonably well, and I hope you agree that the approach is highly effective and widely applicable. The sleep package which implements this approach is available for use and, of course, can be improved as needed. Users of this methodology will need to decide how to estimate the optimal augmentation function, specifically whether to use linear regression or a superlearner that also includes nonparametric machine learning methods. Based on theoretical and simulation results, I think the superlearner-based estimator is generally more efficient and provides valid inference. On the other hand, it's also a bit more complicated and requires some familiarity with machine learning algorithms. The additional complexity may have hampered the use of machine learning methods for covariate adjustment. For instance, FDA's guidance explicitly stays away from this topic. For practical reasons, we recommend the use of linear regression in registration trials. I do think the machine learning methods deserve more attention and better appreciation than they currently receive. Oh, here is a list of references on covariate adjustment for survival endpoints, arranged in chronological order. There is a huge literature on covariate adjustment containing many other important contributions. What we see here is a small subset of that literature with focus on survival endpoints. The earlier references tend to be technical and target specific effect measures. In contrast, the augmentation approach described here and in the last reference is relatively simple and widely applicable. And I hope it will prove useful in pharmaceutical practice. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zhiwei. Yeah, I don't think. Okay, so maybe Zhiwei, could you confirm in the chat the link to the package?
Oh,
That's the question we have.
link to the package. Well, actually, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's given in the paper. So,
It
yeah,
seems to be the case by Yas GitHub.
yeah, yeah.
And any plan to release the package to CRAN?
Well, um, we will work on it. The thing is, we certainly want it to be available to everybody. Um, but making it available on Gram is somewhat complicated because it would involve some legal review. within the company. So that's something we will think about and we'll work on it.
Okay, thank you very much. But I think um, the GitHub access should be um, free for all to access and to try the package. There's another question. Can you confirm? Can you provide some insights on how to select baseline covariates to be adjusted?
Good point. Yeah. So here is my view on this. Well, I understand that there are different approaches, but it seems to me that especially for confirmatory trials, uh, we want to be careful. We don't want to be too aggressive in covariate adjustment. So I would advise that covariate adjustment be limited to uh, a well-defined collection of known prognostic variables. There are, yeah. So these would be based on clinical judgment, and typically it would involve the variables in Table 1. I'm aware that there are efforts to broaden the covariate adjustment to a large collection of covariates and use take advantage of variable selection techniques. Um, I mean, that's an interesting topic to think about, but at the present time, I don't think it's ready for practical use. In any event, it seems to me that most of the efficiency gains comes from the strongest prognostic variables. So, well, it's not clear to me that we will necessarily gain more efficiency simply by including more covariates. Um, I guess the next question is, how does looking at several models work with respect to pre-specification and type 1 error? Okay, so I think to ensure the statistical integrity of the analysis, there definitely has to be pre-specification. So, which might mean that we pre-specify a model for covariate adjustment. Um, but there are also pre-specified approaches available. For instance, some consider several candidate models, and together with a pre-specified procedure for choosing one of the candidate models. In that case, the model will not be pre-specified, but the entire procedure is pre-specified, and whether or not that procedure is valid will have to be, that procedure will have to be evaluated as a whole to determine its validity or invalidity. So, I agree that the analysis should be pre-specified. Um, Although certain components of the analysis, such as the model we use, may be data-driven because in a pre-specified manner. So I guess that there are some yeah, I heard that some people have proposed approaches to uh, to include model selection as part of the analysis. That should be done in a pre-specified manner. I um, in that case, I think the entire procedure should be evaluated together. Uh, in terms of statistical validity. Okay. Let me see. Perhaps this is a question for Yawang. Is there a software? Well, okay. Validation plan suit with, I imagine that using such a highly regular. Right, I understand. So, yeah, so, mm, yeah, I'll relate that question to Yang. But yeah, that's something we need to think about. How likely to have inconsistent results from different superlearner? Um, how likely? Um, I guess, well, it's hard to quantify how likely, but I guess it's always possible when you use different statistically valid methods to analyze the same data set, you can have different results. So that's always a possibility. That's not limited to covariate adjustment. But the practical impact of that seems limited because we would have to be in a borderline case where our P is very close to 0.05 for that sort of differences to really make an impact. So that's why it seems to me that uh, that it's possible to have discrepant results, but it seems rare for them to have a real impact. Right. Um, does covariate adjustment almost lead to increased precision? In theory, yes. Mm, well, at least in terms of asymptotic, where I mean, or maybe your question is whether whether there is a guaranteed efficiency gain relative to an unadjusted analysis, right? Um, it can be made so. I'm not saying that all covariate adjustment methods have guaranteed efficiency gain relative to the unadjusted analysis, but there are ways to make them so. In terms of, but that's in terms of asymptotic variance. In terms of finite sample variance, I guess I cannot say that, but I would say that based on asymptotic theory, we would expect an efficiency gain in finite samples. If a trial has different attrition rates between arms, might it affect the application of these standard methods? Are these methods assuming baseline equivalence and comparable attrition rates? Okay. So first of all, attrition is a separate issue. Um, uh, Whether it may impact, these methods try to take advantage of baseline covariates. It does not really address attrition. Now, um, if we have different attrition rates in different arms, and there is uh, the question how to deal with it, and that question is largely separate from covariate adjustment. So if we do it right, we yeah, then we'll be fine, with or without covariate adjustment. Are these methods assuming baseline? Right. So the covariate adjustment methods are designed to take advantage of baseline covariates. They they well they don't assume baseline equivalence. In fact, well, we assume the stochastic independence between treatment and covariates, and that's guaranteed by randomization. Now, but and randomization does not guarantee actual balance in observed covariates. So there might be actual imbalance. And that's precisely when the covariate adjustment method may help by adjusting those actual imbalance and improve. And, basically, so intuitively, the way it works is and when there's actual imbalance, we can try to adjust for it statistically and bring our treatment effect estimator closer to the truth. So intuitively, that's how we can think of it, and therefore. We don't assume, so we assume a stochastic balance guaranteed by randomization. We don't assume the lack of actual imbalance. In fact, that's exactly when covariate adjustment may help.
So Zhiwei, if I could add to the question about
Okay.
attrition,
Uh-huh.
I think, yeah, I agree with you. It's somewhat a different question to the covariate adjustment question, right? I guess you probably there should think about your estimates and how to handle this type of intercurrent event or missing data that led to attrition. And then afterwards, so let's say after you fill the gaps, fill the missing, then with that data set, then you can apply the covariate adjustment approaches. But I would say for this method, since the covariate adjustment is really just using baseline covariates, which in most cases should not have missing or a lot of missing. So I guess this is relatively a minor issue. But for for the post-baseline results, I would, missing, I would consider estimates and other missing data handling approaches.
Good point. So I see a question here. Two questions. Is the estimator an AIPW estimator? Yes. You can you can think of it as AIPW, and I don't claim credit for developing this approach. The augmentation approach started with Gilead and others decades ago. What I'm trying to point out here is that it can be particularly useful in the setting of survival endpoints, where we don't seem to have a simple and generally applicable approach available. So basically, what we are doing here is explaining to people that, look, this augmentation approach is readily available here. Now, is it technically AIPW? In some cases, yes. For example, for a fully observed outcome, if we are talking about the treatment difference, the risk ratio, then this is exactly AIPW. In other settings, for instance, in the survival setting, with or without a proportional hazards model, I'm not exactly sure whether this corresponds to some kind of previously developed AIPW estimate, but it's certainly it's in the same spirit, and I don't claim credit for AIPW or augmentation. Second, with the linear regression approach, are we implicitly imposing an assumption on the distribution of O given A and W? No. As I said, with linear, so it might be misleading to call it linear regression. It may be better to call it linear augmentation. So the way I look at it is, when we do linear regression, we're not assuming that the optimal augmentation function is in fact linear. What we're doing is we're trying to find the best linear approximation to the optimal augmentation function. So whether or not the true optimal augmentation function is linear, we're just doing the best we can within the class of linear functions. Thank you. Yeah, and certainly the software we have, I think it works, but certainly there will be a lot of areas for improvement, and we'll be happy to improve the software over time. Similar version of a covariate adjusted log rank test. Yes, in fact, that's already available in the paper by Ye et al. 2024, and also Liu and Xiaozi. They both try to improve the log rank test. The only reason I didn't mention the log rank test, because here I approach this as an estimation problem. I start with an estimate, a treatment effect, and a treatment effect estimator. So that's why I didn't mention the test. But you could do something similar for the log rank test. In principle, one can get discrepant results between the regular log rank test and the proposed. Well, that's exactly the point. I mean, if you always get consistent results between the regular log rank test and the proposed method, then your proposed method isn't helping you, right? How are non-collapsibility and non-proportional hazards addressed if the estimator is hazard ratio? How are they addressed, non-collapsibility and well, first of all, in terms of non-proportional hazards, so we don't assume proportional hazards, and so we define our estimate as the limit of the maximum partial likelihood estimate. Well, I guess the question in the presence of non-proportional hazards is how meaningful that estimate is. That depends on how close the model is to the truth. So basically, we leave that question to the study team. Let them decide what is the most meaningful treatment effect measure for for their study. And what we are doing here is we take whatever they decide to do for their primary analysis, and we try to make it more efficient. In terms of non-collapsibility, that's a different one. Non-collapsibility refers to the fact that when we have different collections of covariates in the proportion hazards model, the hazard ratio for treatment means different things. Yes, but again, we try to separate it from covariate adjustment. We try to leave the choice of estimate and an initial estimator to the study team, and focus on improving efficiency via covariate adjustment for whatever estimate and estimator they may choose to use. Can you repeat the result for which the influence function is the most efficient? It was due to the choice of, yes. Well, since I'm not sharing anymore, should I share a screen briefly just to answer the last question about the optimal augmentation function?
Sure.
Okay, just do that briefly. Okay, here we go. Now let me. Yeah, the last one. So yeah, this is the expression for the optimal augmentation function. Yeah, and I guess it's a quite standard result. I guess it's um, um, available in many publications, I guess.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. Like I said, this topic is certainly of interest. As we can see, there are many questions, uh, and um, and we will share the recording and slides. And since the paper is recently published, feel free to check out the paper for more detailed information. So I don't see there are other questions. Shall we close the meeting then? All right.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.